Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can find us on the web, caltoncutlery.com. This is going to be a video that I should have done a couple of months ago. A fella asked me, we were talking on one of the forums about reading quench patterns and how to read quench patterns and a whole bunch of stuff that I've noticed about quench patterns in relation to how the final knife is going to perform. So today, or this evening, I'm doing some quenching, I don't know, 20 or 30 knives, something like that. These are all at a 1095 high carbon, and I decided to go ahead and do the video and show what I meant by quench patterns. Okay, let's say you take okay, let's take a step back. Quench patterns aren't the end-all be-all of knife making. You know, if a pattern doesn't show up quite right on your scale patterns, but then you take the blade and you finish heat treating it and then you etch it, between the scale pattern and the etch pattern, you get to see an awful lot about what the potential of that blade is going to be. Now, if you take what you learn from those two patterns and then combine that with your logbook, your destructive testing, plus your customer feedback, then it's just another indication that things went well, or that they didn't go well and you need to go back and look at something. So all these blades right here are 1095. There's a couple more of them over there that I've also they're finished up, ready to be tempered. They're all from, well, with the exception of these two and I think two of them over there, they're all from the same sheet of steel. This steel is 16th inch thick 1095 from Admiral, and it came out of a sheet that was 2 foot wide and I want to say 6 or 8 foot long, something like that. These blades right here have just been quenched once. I like the multiple quench for high carbon steel, at least the three high carbon steels that I use. The quench patterns, I haven't really worked with the stainless enough to be reading them, and they don't show scale patterns quite like high carbon steel does. But I would guess that more than likely these scale patterns and the things I'm going to tell you about them probably hold true for other steels also. I mean, I work with 1095, 5160, and 52100 in the high carbon class. You know, the scale patterns might hold true also with W2 or 1084, you know, any of the other class of knives or class of steels. Okay, so these three blades right here have been quenched one time. Now the kiln is heated up to 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. The 16th inch thick blades are heated they're placed in the hot kiln. The timer's set for 7 minutes, and at the end of the 7 minutes they're pulled out of the kiln and they're edge quenched into 130 to 140 degree canola oil. There's a thermometer. There's a couple of regulating plates. That right there is it's a rack for after you quench the blade, then you move it over to where it's spine up and inside the holder, and that holds the blade edge down, spine up, until it's cooled to the temperature of the oil. Then they get pulled out and hung on these little pins right here, and the oil drips off of the blade into the pan, and then once they're cool to the touch, then I pull them out, wipe them off with a rag, file test them, and then they'll go into the tempering oven. So anyway, these blades right here are a single quenched, have only been quenched once. If you'll notice, there's not, the scale pattern looks really blotchy. See, there's bits and pieces of scale hanging all over the place. You can kind of see the line right in here to the depth of the oil, but it's still kind of everywhere. These blades, even though they'll file test as being hard, they won't cut as well as what they could after they've been quenched twice more. These blades here, you can see how much cleaner they look. You have definite scale patterns, but it's in a very, very straight line, and there's not much of a transition zone right here between the hard part and the softer part. This is just a very, very crisp line. These blades, they will cut good. They'll cut probably 80% or so of what the final triple quench blade will, but you can tell how much cleaner that scale pattern is. Another thing, I don't really know why on earth these scale patterns, what's happening on a metallurgical level inside the blades. I just know that after testing a whole bunch of these things to destruction, and keeping notes and kind of paying attention to what the blades look like in between, the heat treat steps, what kind of happens. Now these two blades have been quenched 3 times. Now you can kind of see, now this line right here isn't near as crisp, but the steel is that nice gray color with a couple of little, you might not be able to see them on these blades, we've got some others we'll look at, but a couple of little bitty lighter spots here and there. That right there is about perfect. And after these blades get ground, if I do hand sand them, this line right here will show up as your hardening line. A lot of people call it a temper line, which it is a tempering line if you differentially temper the blade. I do differentially hardening the blade, whereas just this portion of the blade gets put into the oil and gets hardened. The rest of this steel, while it will get a little bit of air hardening going on, it isn't really hardened to the same effect that the edge is, and so it's a differential hardening heat treatment. Which a differential tempering heat treat would be as if you harden the whole blade and then with a torch or a big chunk of metal came back in and softened the spine more than you did the edge. That would be a differential temper, and in that case then this would be a tempering line and not a hardening line. So anyway, these right here have had 3 quenches, and they will cut amazing. Well, up to the potential of this steel. Now see this one right here, this set, you can see more of that kind of splotchiness coming in. Once you see that, or if this, occasionally you'll get this, this real clean look right here going. And I believe that has to do with the thickness of the steel and the mass that you're working with. Some of them just come out cleaner than others do. Here's some more. You can start seeing, a little bit of discoloration on that 3rd quench, and a much heavier I'm not even sure what I'm trying to say there. Not quite as well defined line. Like these ones have that real sharp line right there, and these ones, it's kind of blurred, a little bit of scale popping off in little bitty places there, a little bit of splotchiness. Those are the knives that I've seen that will cut the best. Here's some more of them. These are some Warncliffe paring knives. Now, if you're all of these blades have been heat treated at a full thickness. So pretty much they're scribed and cut out, and then the edges have been smoothed up, so that we have nice 220 grit scratches going lengthways through the blade prior to heat treat. So there's no stress risers or anything that could cause the blade to crack during the quench. But if you ever get to if you do end up doing a pre-heat treat grind, and I know a lot of guys like to grind as close to finished dimensions as they can on soft steel before heat treat, which, if that's what you do and you test your knives and they end up performing really good, well then, hey, that's a great way to do it. But if you do get this edge too thin prior to heat treat, and when you pull your blades out of the quench, whether it's a differential harden or a full harden, and you see bits and pieces of scale hanging on at the very edge, then you finish that knife out and you find out that, hey, this thing doesn't cut like it should, and then you take it back to the grinder and you grind off, say a 1/16 inch off of that edge to simulate, using it and sharpen it and using it and sharpen it, and then all of a sudden the knife starts cutting like it should. More than likely what's happening is that you heat this blade up in the kiln or in the forge, either way. Now, while that blade is in a nice warm kiln, we'll just go with that for this example, it's at a nice toasty 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. You're going to put it into 140 degree canola oil, or if you're going to use Parks or whatever. But like the temperature inside my shop right now, actually let's go find it. I'm going to guess we're at about 50, 60 degrees Fahrenheit. We are at 49. So that blade is going to go through one heck of a shock being pulled from that nice toasty 1500 degrees Fahrenheit oven to a 50 degree room and then into 140 degree canola. And what will happen is, and your biggest indication that this is happening, is the pieces of scale attaching to the edge. When you get that, what happened was that you either weren't hot enough in your kiln, or you couldn't get the blade out of the kiln and into the oil fast enough to get it hard, or you ground it too thin prior to heat treat. That scale hanging on there is telling you that that portion of the blade was not hot enough when it went into the oil to properly harden. So what you'll end up having is you'll have, if you're doing let's say that happened on this one, you'll have the scales hanging on here, which means it didn't get hot enough to harden and it's not fully hard. There'll be some air hardening, like I say, but not fully hard. This portion will be nice and hard, but that portion at the edge, it cooled off too much to harden. So then the key to letting you know exactly what happened that verifies the scale pattern is that when you sharpened it and you ground off that portion of the edge that was too cold to harden, as soon as you get that gone and you get back into steel that was thick enough to retain the heat from the kiln long enough to make the trip from the kiln to the oil, then all of a sudden, bam, the knife starts cutting like it's supposed to. Anyways, I think that's about it. It's kind of late, and I've got to finish heat treating these couple left. Like I said, while I was heat treating, I wanted to go ahead and show you some of the things that I've seen on reading scale patterns while you're heat treating, and it can give you an indication. Oh, so let's say you don't have a thermometer in your oil, and you're doing a triple quench process, and you're doing, say, 10 blades or so. You heated the oil up, you know, and it kind of got to where you thought it was hot enough if you don't have a temperature thermometer. Maybe you're shooting it with a laser thermometer. And your first couple come out looking real nice like this, and then all of a sudden, you know, they start coming out looking more like this. That can tell you that either your thermocouple got bad, or more than likely your oil cooled off too much, especially if you're using like like I am today. And I really wasn't thinking when I grabbed this quench pan, but this quench pan is the one that I typically use for larger kitchen knives, like 8-inch chef's knives or santokus, wabochos, whatever. Because you're heating up a 2-inch wide chunk of steel that's 3/32 of an inch thick and the blade's 8 inches long. That's a tremendous amount of heat, you know, going into the oil that the oil needs to dissipate. So you pick a wide pan that's, you know, it can be shallower, and that way the oil's got more surface area and it dumps all that extra heat faster to keep you inside your temperature range. If you're doing a lot of little knives like these, what I should have done was grabbed a narrower, deeper quench tank, and therefore it'll have less surface area at the top to dissipate that heat, and I won't have to chase the heat so much. So what I've been doing on this one today is, or this afternoon, is I've got some old blades that I didn't really like, and I keep them on hand here, and I'll just throw one of those into the kiln and warm it up, and then they're a lot bigger and they'll carry a lot more heat into the oil. Just do that about every second or third batch, and then that'll keep the temperature of the oil maintained well enough. Anyways, I guess that's just some rambling on a heat treat day. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.